So, John, I really enjoyed our first discussion and your insights into the handling of surge events from the loss adjuster's point of view. Many people have actually taken note that your children thought you were a fireman. So, I thought we should actually discuss the subject of fire and also the immediate aftermath, because that's where the loss adjuster is so important. So, I'm Sue Taylor, and you're listening to a Sitting with Sue podcast. And sitting with me again today is John Armstrong. John, before we get started, and bearing in mind you're nearly 40 years in the adjusting fraternity, what is an important industry lesson that you have learned?
Like people always ask me, give me a briefing about the claim, and I always say to them, how do you call the broker? I mean, it's so important to get the broker's insight into the claim from the very start. They'll have had a relationship with a policyholder, sometimes going back years, and they'll have been meeting them, a few times a year. They'll know the individuals very well. So for an adjuster not to get an insight from the broker is a failing, really. So I find getting a relationship going with the broker and keeping them updated on the claim is really important.
I can't agree more, having worked for a broker in the past for many, many years. So, John, in going into the fire claims in particular, and I guess that they are probably the bread and butter for the major loss adjusters. You've mentioned a few of your news headline events in the past, but have you got any more comment on those particular ones?
I'd have to be really careful with, commercial organizations and the fact they've had an event, because it's often commercially sensitive when a fire happens, because customers might see a fire incident as a major problem in terms of consistency of supply and all those sorts of things. So a lot of companies, have dealt with very large fires where they haven't hit the press because people have wanted to just stay quiet about them, really, rather than have it spread across the newspapers. So the insurers, brokers, ourselves take that into account when we're dealing with things. Obviously, some companies, the fact they've returned from a disaster to a success, they don't mind that being advertised, because it shows how their abilities to be flexible and adaptive, and really, really a good thing. I probably can't list the commercial enterprises that have been involved with. And of course, there's always the issue, not always, hopefully, but fatalities and serious injuries that might happen, which, there can be investigations from the HSE and other organisations.
Yes, unfortunately, I've been involved in an awful lot of fatalities, and those you can't normally keep out of the press. I sat in front of news at 10 many a time thinking, oh no. But yes, indeed, there are sensitivities around a huge number of them. So let's go back to the fire and the point you are first instructed by an insurance company. So what do you actually say when you get that first call?
Strangely, in my experience, fires seem to happen at a weekend or on a Friday afternoon. Not quite worked out why, but certainly from fire brigade talks I've been to, they've said that their major fires tend to occur on a Friday. Whether it's everybody's looking forward to a weekend or hard to know, but certainly at weekends, there's usually less supervision, less people around. If a fire occurs during the week, there's somebody there to spot it and put it out. But I guess at a weekend, there's usually a lower number of people around to spot things. Even with automatic detection, there's still delays involved in actually getting there to deal with it before the fire starts to spread out of control. So that call will be from the broker, actually, normally, because if it is at a weekend, getting hold of somebody at an insurance company can be difficult. They do have helplines and they do have arrangements in place, but not to the same level as a weekday. So I always recommend to brokers that they should have a loss adjuster's phone number in their mobile. I would jokingly say, who you're going to call, because nobody expects a call coming through of somebody having a disaster, but it happens from time to time, and it's good to be prepared. So I'd always recommend they get a nominated loss adjuster in place, hopefully who's met the policyholder. And I'm talking about large commercial enterprises here that met the policyholder on previous occasions, whether it's just to have a walk through the policy with them or maybe previous claims. It can certainly save a lot of time going through information if you've got a familiarity with the organisation.
I can definitely agree with that. I mean, I at one point got a complete complex because it was probably about 10, 15 years ago, but 3 Friday afternoons in a row at 5 to 5, I got a call about a major loss occurring, and I got a real complex. But all of those adjusters were in my phone, they're all pre-nominated. I knew exactly what to do. So it really, really is important. So we've established that the first call is normally on a late Friday afternoon
Yeah.
or at the weekend. So I can see why your children thought you were a fireman because you immediately disappeared. So what happens after that?
Well, it's getting the insurance company notified is really important. So if we get a call over a weekend, we're not formally appointed by anybody at this point in time. So any advice we're giving is just general advice that we're giving as loss adjusters. And often, even very competent organizations can be paralyzed by the fact that it's an insurance claim. So they're thinking, well, we can't do anything because the insurance company hasn't seen it yet. So they've not approved anything. So just giving them reassurance and talking through things that they can do, because they'll have a workforce that's going to turn up on Monday. And if they've got an incident, then they've got to redirect deliveries. There'll be customers awaiting for deliveries. There'll be suppliers with things arriving that have got to be redirected elsewhere. So it can be incredibly complex, the number of things that need to be done after a fire. People often say to us before an event, oh, well, we'd just do this or we'd just do that. There's just so many things to do that it completely paralyze people in what to do first, really. So I guess talking through a plan of action using experience is really important. Having given advice over the weekend with different people, brokers, we often face a call on the Monday morning to the insurer, sometimes to find that they decide to appoint another firm of adjusters and the instruction, but hopefully that's rare because you tend to build a relationship with somebody quite quickly when you're helping them deal with problems.
Well, they're in distress, aren't they? And
Yeah.
that again emphasizes the real need that if you've got pre-nominations and you've got the whole process going, if you've got something in writing, then I know that a lot of the time the adjusters can get hold of the head of claims of a particular insurance company rather than just listen to the
Mm.
recorded message that says our office hours are, and we will be open at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, which is more than a little aggravating on occasions. What do you actually then do once you've got the clearance, and in what order before you actually go to site?
Yeah, obviously, getting the visit arranged and booked in with everybody is important. We need to assemble with a large fire a group of people, really, rather than just it being me turning up. So my experience and expertise is in buildings, so it's not going to cover all the different things that are going to happen. And in the main, with a commercial business, it'll be the business interruption, which is the key. And as a colleague, and often says to me, the material damage has happened with a fire. The fire's been put out. The material damage is there. It's just a matter of measuring it. The business interruption has just started. It's to how quickly you can mitigate it and eventually, hopefully, stop it and get them back to normal again. But that is not a thing that anybody can measure accurately at this early stage of the claim. So information gathering is really important from the insurer and broker. So having those conversations, starting to get the coverage worked out, copies of the policy schedule and the policy wording are really important. Looking at conditions, warranties, the things that are going to affect the insurance company's decision on policy liability. That is the key thing that we're working on from the initial instruction, is getting to a point where the insurance company signs off on the claim and we can get the money flowing to the policyholder. So working out all the things that are going to affect that decision-making process. So identifying what the cause was is really important, and that usually takes the involvement of a forensic scientist to work out exactly what has happened and whether it has contravened any of the the agreements that the insurers have with the policyholder about, let's say, setting alarms or security measures, or just simply the way certain processes are carried out. So gathering those individuals together, getting them to the first appointment to start the process of investigation is really key.
So you've now created your mini crowd scene. You've done all of your prep work. So what do you then expect to find when you get to the site, apart from an awful lot of people?
Yeah. Usually what's in my mind now is large fires where there'll be a police cordon, and there's usually a plume of smoke rising, and with lots and lots of people. Obviously, getting into the police cordon is tricky in itself, but explaining who I am and why I'm there, they lift the tape for me, and on I go.
True.
Get through. And so, you know, I'll have set up a meeting place for people, because often offices won't be accessible. Sometimes we're meeting at a local hotel or somewhere outside of the fire zone. But I do find to get everybody familiar with the site, a walk round, if it's possible, just to judge the sort of challenges that we're going to have. Are we dealing with a demolition job, or is it going to be repairs? Are there going to be specialists needed? Just the scale of structural damage, that sort of thing. Very hard to start to identify the cause when there's a dangerous structure that is hanging over the top of the point of ignition. Often the fire brigade will require a demolition contractor. You know, it might take them a number of weeks to put the fire out, and they'll be demolishing the building gradually whilst that process occurs. And I try to coordinate the forensic scientists going in at the right point when we've got safe access for them. So it's quite a balancing act, really, to get that right.
I don't think people really realise how much a site can smell as well as be actually a dangerous site. But there's also an awful lot of water around because in order to put the fire out, there's an awfully large wet process that goes on.
Yeah.
And it can be quite chaotic.
Yeah. Often a lot of people there taking photographs. You can have reporters, and there might be staff members. That there are even, on occasion, competitors may see this incident as an opportunity to gain some market position out of it, which is where the commercial sensitivity comes in. Mind you, today with drones and things like that, I remember one large fire. This was probably 20 odd years ago, before drones were a big thing. Somebody took a hot air balloon over the top of the premises to get some good photographs. So those went in my preliminary report, of course.
And drones are used. I've done a lot of claims over the last, I would say probably 6, 7 years that have involved drones.
Yeah.
It's become quite common because it does make it much safer for all those involved. By nature, the actual details of claims are unforeseen until they've actually happened, because you can do an awful lot of scenario testing.
Hmm.
It's fairly rare that you actually get the actual perfect storm. It's a bit like COVID. Nobody envisaged COVID. But have you any examples of something that completely and utterly nonplussed you?
I'm thinking back, I guess as a younger adjuster, I worked in London for a time and was given a new claim in Soho. You probably know what's coming. My manager sent me off to have a look at this building, which I think was a sort of shop on the ground floor, flats above. So he just said, record everything. So went off with my trusty camera and notepad and met up with the policyholder, toured all the floors and all the rooms, taking photographs everywhere. And he kind of left me to it a little bit in this particular building, and he was happy for me to have a look round. So I found a door to a basement, and I thought, well, I better go down here because this is probably where all the extinguishment water's finished up, you know. So I wanted to see how deep it was, the water. But when I got down to the basement, it was actually a bar. And there were people sitting at tables in ones and twos, and there's sort of dim lighting. Well, candles on the table, and water dripping through the ceiling. And it dawned on me slowly that it was what I could only describe as a hostess bar, really. So they all scattered when my camera came out, of course, but that was quite a surprise.
I'm not that surprised. As a trainee underwriter, I underwrote many a risk in Soho. I'll tell you some stories offline. But back to the topic in hand, timing is obviously really critical when it comes to loss. And what sort of things do you do in the short term, say the first 48 hours? Because I normally find the first 48 hours to be pretty manic and crucial.
Yeah, it is. And phone calls to as many people as you can possibly manage in terms of informing them about what's happened and how bad it is. As from the first visit with my kind of group of adjusters, all looking after their individual heads of claim, me with buildings, somebody else with machinery, somebody else with business interruption. So once we've had our first visit, we then, with the help of the policyholder, really is to look at the impact. It's me looking at the scale of the building's damage and working out, is it a total loss and we're going to have to start again? Maybe either buying or rebuilding something, a new building, how long it's going to take to find machines. And often they'll be coming from other countries and they'll be with waiting periods for that to occur. So all of that gets built up into what we call a reserve that we mentioned in our first talk about. This is the cost estimate that we're giving to the insurance company about the eventual cost of the claim. So we would generally meet in a local hotel or a McDonald's or something to have a confidential chat, and we work up our individual estimates. Then I would ring the insurance company to let them know the number, which produces a number of different reactions because it can be quite a large number, and there can be total silence, or there can be a barrage of questions, or somewhere in between, really. But that reserve is really important because insurers will have their own insurers, reinsurers, and at different levels, these different organizations need to be notified within hours of a claim, not days. There'll be agreements in place that they have to be notified immediately, and it starts to have an impact on stock prices and such like. So it's important we get it right, or as close as we can.
Yes, I've dealt with claims where it has literally impacted on their share value within a matter of hours. And you
Yeah.
do have to think about that. And also the fact that the response could actually have a positive impact on their share value as to how they've responded versus how they haven't responded. So there's all sorts of different things that have to be considered. So that's phase one.
Yeah.
So after phase one, well, what comes next? What is phase two?
Working on a preliminary report, which can be a large document, it being a significant fire. So, building up detail about the business that's been affected, working with the policyholder on getting mitigation measures in place. We wouldn't at this stage have policy liability confirmed in the main from the insurance company. So we're still working alongside the policyholder without the benefit of saying, we're paying for these things. But as a commercial business, they'll be using their own finances to be able to secure contractors and the like to get some initial in place. Often, as I was saying earlier, working with a demolition contractor to get making safe done and that type of thing. A lot of loss adjusters do make the mistake of awaiting policy liability decision from the insurer before engaging again. Let's say it takes 2 or 3 weeks. A lot will have happened in that time. So, maintaining that contact with the policyholder, keep visiting site and agreeing as far as you can what measures are taken, because they'll already be putting in place a mitigation plan because they have to, because they've got a business to run and there are people's jobs at stake. And whilst the insurance claim is obviously, extremely important to them, if it's a very large global business, they'll be making their own commercial decisions about what they need to do, where they need to move production to other locations. Sometimes around the world, they'll start production up in other places. All of those things need their input to saying how the policy will respond to these decisions. and starting to build up a business case for working out whether something is economically viable to do. Often everything's pretty much economically viable given the amount of time, but you'll know with business interruption policies, there's a set indemnity period, which if something's economic after 20 years, it's no good if your policy's only giving you 2 years of cover.
Yes, and that relates to things such as flying in the goods rather than them coming
Yeah,
in by ship.
exactly.
So it might be 24-hour delay rather than 6-week delay. And don't get me on the subject of business interruption because, as you know, I'll go on for hours.
But it is really, really important.
When do you regard that your job has actually been done?
The final report is always the final act on the claim, is just encapsulating the story from our preliminary report at the start of a claim. There could be multiple interim reports to the insurers requesting payments to the policyholder. The final report kind of encapsulates everything that's happened. You hope it's a document that you can be proud of, really, and that you've achieved a successful outcome for all parties. It could be years after the incident because some of these events are extremely large. Whilst it might take you a year or two to put a building back, the business needs to rebuild again back to where it was again. So there are some claims that go on for quite a number of years. So that final report will give all of that story, explain how we agreed the claim. There'll usually be a huge spreadsheet with all the costs that were incurred and how we dealt with them and allocated them across the policy. Once that report has gone in, that's usually the final act, if you like, on a claim. But there's sometimes a recovery process that would take place, which may be even more years after that.
In fact, at the time of recording this podcast, it's just been announced that Notre Dame has been finished, and that's 5 years.
I thought that was really good going for having done a few cathedral claims in the past. I thought 5 years. I didn't think they'd be able to do it when I first heard it. That I think Macron had said that it was going to be that long. I'm looking forward to looking inside, really, and seeing what they've done.
Or maybe we organise a little trip then. But John, once again, you've been absolutely brilliant. We've discussed when you're most likely to receive the call, how you arrange who you're going to meet once you're on site. You've lined all the right people up and you've moved as quickly as possible. So all I've got to add at the moment is to say thank you. You've been listening to Sitting with Sue, Insurance Questions Answered. Check out my website at www.suetaylor.co.uk for other podcasts available. Goodbye for now.